Hi, this is Alex from PHP Academy and welcome to this CSS tutorial on styling form elements. Now in this tutorial we're going to talk a little bit about how we can select different form field elements either by giving it a class or an ID or selecting it by its type. We're then going to look at styling text input types or similar, so for example password fields, things like that. We're also then going to look at styling text areas, which are very slightly different, not too much but slightly different. We're also going to look at styling submit buttons and just buttons themselves, and then we're going to take a little minute to talk about elements that we can't style, unfortunately. So first of all, how do we select form elements? Well, let's go ahead and create a form element on our page, and we'll talk a bit about how we can target this element and style it. So I'm going to create an input with a type of text. Okay, so I could either give this an ID. So for example, if it was the search bar at the top of my website, I could give this an ID of search. And then I know that from my style sheet, I can just come over here and I can use search and I can start to style this up, add padding, margin, borders, colors, heights, widths, anything, font sizes, whatever I want to do. So that's one way of styling it. Another way to style would be to obviously assign a class. So I might add a class here and I might give it a class of, say, password. I might want to add a red ring, or a red border around any password fields, or add a yellow border around them. That's just an example, but you know what I mean if you want to group a class of things. There's a perfectly acceptable alternative to doing this if you're targeting an element by its type. If you were grouping them, say, by a contact form or something like that, you wouldn't use this. It would be a complete waste of markup. There's ways in CSS that we can target elements a lot better than just assigning classes or IDs to them. We can also target things like input fields by their type. So we'll take a look at how we can do that just now. Then we'll actually start to style this input field up. Some of the properties that we can use, including the font, which we might need to inherit from the parent element. But let's go ahead and start to style this up. So the first thing we want to do is select it. I'm not going to add a class, I'm not going to add an ID to it. Okay, so we can generally select all input fields or all input elements by just using input. Just the same as we'd do A or P or div or anything like that. We can do it by the element type. However, we can also do it by the input type. So to do this, we use input, we use square brackets, and we say type equals, and we specify inside of here which type we want to target. So the example I was talking about earlier was password, so we could say input type equals password, and we could go ahead and say border 1 pixel solid yellow, for example. Okay, so that's one way to that is a good way to target elements if you generally want to style all of your input fields the same, and obviously that's recommended just to keep design consistency. Let's go ahead and change this to text, just so we can start styling up this text field that's on the page. So this is how it looks at the moment in the browser, relatively straightforward. What I'm also going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to set a overall font size for my body, or a font for my body. So I'm going to choose to let's say font, we'll do this separately, font family, I don't know, Arial, and we'll provide a backup, so sans serif if I can type it, and we'll say font size 0.8 EM. Okay, so when we refresh, we've now got a body font. So let's go ahead and pop a paragraph just over here. So this is some page text. Now when I refresh, we've got that paragraph up here. Now notice the difference between the font inside of the text area and the font outside. You probably can't notice, you can notice that it's the same. It's hard to tell when you've got it sort of shifted over. It's weird how the eye plays tricks on you. But we've got a font size here that's inherited. So this field, this type of field, has inherited the font from the body of the document. There is a form field or a field that won't do that, and we'll talk about that in a moment. Okay, so we've inherited this font, automatically. Now let's go ahead and start to style this, as we desire. I'll just choose a couple of properties that we can use on this just to make it look a bit better, but obviously you're free to play around with it, which is great. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to predefine a width of this. Now usually what would happen is, many people would just say size equals, I don't know, like 50 or something. So when we go ahead and refresh, we get this sort of elongated area. Now this is obviously wasting space in the markup, so there's no need to do this. We can provide a width using CSS. So I might say width 300 pixels, and that's just going to provide us with, a width to the element. No need to add extra bloat to the markup. We can obviously go ahead and set a height, but that's not recommended because we're going to be pulling it down. Instead, we want to go ahead and add a padding to the center. So a padding of about 3 pixels to 5 pixels is probably acceptable to make this still look like a normal form field, but just to pad it out an extra bit. So if I type this is some text, you can see that we've got this just extra padding on the outside, which makes the area a lot bigger. It looks a bit smoother, nicer. The text isn't too close to the border on the edge, so it makes everything look a bit nicer. Obviously we can go ahead and set specific colors for inside the form field, so we could say slate grey, for example. So we can obviously use hex, RGB, RGBA, anything we want to do. So I've sort of created, something a bit lighter, so a grey color. Anything really. Borders are, obviously you can style border solid and black, for example. You can make it dashed or dotted. There's a variety of properties you can use on fields. So essentially what we've done now is we've learned how we target this element, then we've learned that we can actually style up within here. And remember, this is probably the most important with regards to the width. We don't want to be adding size to the markup because it's just wasting document space. Okay, so we've looked at styling this with this selector. Now let's go ahead and look at styling a text area. So we'll do this quickly and we'll end this part of the video. Okay, so I'm going to keep this here. This is quite important that we keep this. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to get rid of this. And I'm going to create a text area instead. Now you'll immediately notice that text area is different to an input because input's self-closing. It doesn't have to have a closing tag. In here we do, because we can actually place content within here that will be rendered in the browser. So hopefully you knew that already. Okay, so we've got this text area. We're not going to assign a class or an ID to it. We're just going to generally select text area. Slightly easier because text areas can't have types. So there we are. Now you might be used to using rows and cols, which obviously stand for rows and columns. So we might say rows equals 7 and cols equals, say, like 35. And then we go ahead and refresh. And you can see we've got this text area here ready to type in a message or a comment or anything like that. Now, there's one thing that we need to bear in mind here is that when we go ahead and say hello there, you'll notice that the font is a lot different to the default font size or the inherited font size of the text field that we just created. So by default, we've got this font for text area that says I'm a text area. I'm unsure myself of why it defaults to this style of font, but there we go. We really all we need to know is how to override it. So we've provided rows and cols. We don't need these. It's recommended that we don't actually use these. So all we need is text area. If we're styling general text areas, we target text area. If we're styling specific text areas, we can add a class or an ID. So we've targeted text area. Let's go ahead and set a width and a height to it, which is the correct way to do things. Let's go ahead and set a width of 350 pixels and a height of 180. And when we refresh, you see that we've still got our width, we've still got our extended height, but we didn't need to add any extra bloat to the markup. Now we want to go ahead and inherit this font from the body. We don't want this horrible font that's here by default. So what do we do? Well, we say font inherit. Okay, and when we go ahead and refresh now, hello, this is a comment. We've automatically inherited the font from the body of the document, because that's the containing or the parent element. Now be careful, because if you have specified a font for a container that contains text area, you'll automatically inherit the font from that. So we can either go ahead and sort of re-specify this. So we could say font family Arial sans serif. Then we can go and set a font size, or obviously we could use the shorthand font property, but there's not really any need to do this, and you'll notice that we've also got this odd problem with the font size as well. It's a bit tricky, but obviously that's what we've got our element inspector for. We can go ahead and we can take a look at our font size and everything like that, enlarge it, see what happens, play around with it. Okay, so what else can we do with the text area? Well, we can do anything that we can do with a regular element. We can add some padding on here, so we can add, say, padding of 5 pixels. We can add a border, so 1px solid and black. We can do absolutely anything would usually be able to do with a regular element. So there's not really much difference there. I just wanted to point out the font property, or the font problem, sorry, that we get when we place a text area on our page. We need to specify which font we need to inherit, where we want to inherit that. Okay, so we've taken a look at a text input, and that includes things like passwords, emails, anything like that. And we've also taken a look at styling a text area. In the next part of the tutorial, we're going to look at styling buttons, and we're actually going to try and make a fairly nice looking button. So head over to the second part of the tutorial for that, and we'll also be discussing some elements that we can't actually apply styles to.